bring up an article here that caused me and a couple of my libertarian friends to get into a pretty heated debate about the trans issue. It's not an issue I enjoy speaking on at all, by the way. I try and avoid it. If you look at my past videos, I've touched on it briefly, but it's not something I like to talk about. But let me bring this article up. And there's something that gets missed here, and it's pretty funny for me, is that there's outside of the Libertarian Party, there seems to be this view that this is what libertarians believe, and you can just put a stamp on libertarians and say they all think essentially this way. This is what all the libertarians think, okay? And it's just not true. This is why so many of our debates spill out into the public eye. This is why people are confused about what libertarianism means. We don't all think the same. We all don't believe the same things. We actually, most of us have come from either the Democrat progressive side, got disenfranchised with the Democrat Party and came over to libertarianism, or got disenfranchised with the Republican Party from a neoconservative perspective, and left that neoconservative view behind and came to the Libertarian Party. That doesn't mean that, like a person like me, I have relatively conservative values. I know progressive libertarians who came here from the Democrat side who have relatively progressive values. Okay. And so we argue about these things. There isn't a unified belief system amongst libertarians other than we are incredibly wary of the government being involved in our personal or economic lives at all. We are very afraid of that. And I don't think either the Republicans or the Democrats have really shown that they share that concern about an over-involved government. So Trump pushes to end Medicaid care for transgender youth nationally. Now, so here's what this is. First is not being allowed to use Medicaid and Medicare dollars for transition procedures, for gender affirming care for trans youth, so on and so forth. Okay, most people actually agree with this. If you're very, very progressive, maybe you don't. The more controversial part of this thing is that there's a push to prevent any hospitals from receiving Medicaid or Medicare dollars if they are performing what would be, here's the rule on this, based on the performance of sex trait modification procedures on children. Boy, it's really, for me anyway, it's really, really hard to say that that's a bad thing, that's not an okay idea, that's not an okay thing to do. Sorry. First, from a libertarian perspective, the federal government shouldn't be involved in healthcare. There's no role for the federal government to play in healthcare. Let local communities, local governments, state governments, if you want a state answer to people having issues accessing healthcare, that's a state issue. It's not a federal government issue at all. The other thing is, from my conservative value says, yeah, I don't want children having, let me read this exactly again, sex trait modification procedures on children. And one of the parts of this argument that we got into was that they're talking about it not being for trans, but other issues. And I'm like, look, everybody would say, I think everybody agrees that outside of actual medical issues, nobody's saying that you have this actual medical issue, this physical ailment, this abnormality. Yes, of course it's okay to treat that. I think everybody knows what we're talking about. We're talking about doing things to alter the gender, to alter the sex, to make biological changes to perfectly healthy children. There, I don't think anybody, I think very, very few people actually support that. So it's very difficult for me to speak against this, other than it's an overstep of the federal government. And I would caution my people who agree with me from a conservative perspective to just remember, one day we may have a president who says, we're going to withhold Medicaid and Medicare from any facility that does not perform these things, that we're going to require that you have to do these things in order to receive federal dollars. We always have to take these things and mirror them and say, what does this look like on the other side? And put ourselves in a position of, and then your principal should say, well, I don't think the federal libertarian principle anyway is going to say, I don't want the federal government having the power to make these decisions, or I don't want the federal government to have the power to take these decisions out of a doctor's hands by threatening money and funding for these hospitals, which is why the federal government really shouldn't be involved in this at all. That's the only principled position to take on this, no matter what your feeling is on trans youth and that whole issue. The only principled perspective is federal government should not be involved.